There's a moment in modern warfare where a country stops being a threat and starts being a target. That moment doesn't announce itself. It doesn't come with a declaration or a press conference. It comes when the first missile loses its radar lock and the crew on the ground realizes no one is coming to tell them what to do next. That's the moment this story is about. To understand what happened, you have to understand what Iran spent the better part of a decade building. Not just weapons, a philosophy. A belief that layered air defenses, buried command structures, and distributed missile networks could make any aerial campaign too costly to sustain. The Iranians studied every major air war since the Gulf in 1991. They took notes, they invested, and by the time this operation began, they had built what many analysts consider the most complex integrated air defense system in the Middle East outside of Russia's own territory. The outer ring alone covered hundreds of kilometers, long-range search radars, surface-to-air missile batteries stacked in overlapping coverage zones, early warning networks tied into fiber optic lines specifically to avoid the kind of electronic intercept that had burned them before. At the center of the system sat command nodes buried under reinforced concrete, hardened against everything except a direct penetrating munition. On paper, it looked impenetrable. The problem with air defense networks is that they're only as strong as the communication lines binding them together. Destroy the links and you don't have a system anymore. You have a collection of isolated units, each working blind, each making decisions without context, each becoming a liability instead of an asset. The planners on the other side understood this better than anyone. The operation didn't begin with a bang. It began with silence. Weeks before the first aircraft crossed into Iranian airspace, something quieter was already in motion. Electronic surveillance aircraft had been systematically mapping every frequency Iran's air defense network used, every radar emission, every communication protocol, every handshake between a battery and its command node was cataloged, analyzed, and indexed. The invisible architecture of an entire country's air defense became a document, and that document became a targeting list. When the first wave launched, it wasn't a blunt instrument. It was a key cut specifically for the lock it was about to open. The opening move went to the missiles, not the fighters, not the bombers. Missiles designed for exactly one purpose, finding radar emissions and riding them to their source. The technical name is anti-radiation missile. The operational reality is simpler than that. You turn on your radar, you die. It's not a threat, it's a physics problem. An Iranian radar site on the western approach had been active for 11 minutes. In a different era, 11 minutes of radar operation would be unremarkable. That night, it was enough. The targeting solution was already computed. The aircraft carrying the launch platform had been orbiting at altitude, burning fuel, waiting for exactly this moment. The missile left the rail, lit its motor, and the radar crew had no idea it was coming until there was nothing left of them to have ideas. Emission to impact, under 2 minutes. That sequence repeated itself across multiple sites in the first 40 minutes. Not every radar went dark immediately. Some operators were fast enough to shut down before the inbound was close enough to lose track. But that's the other half of the trap. A radar that's been shut down to avoid destruction is a radar that isn't defending anything. You either stay on and die, or you go dark and become useless. There is no third option. By the time the first wave completed its run, Iran's Western Air Defense Corridor had been reduced from an integrated network to a patchwork of confused, isolated units trying to figure out what had just happened. That's when the fighters pushed in. 12 aircraft crossed the border in a formation that would have been invisible to most of the world's air defense systems on their best day. These were not their best days. Each jet's radar could track contacts at ranges that exceeded anything the defenders below could detect in return. The math was deliberately, brutally asymmetric. By the time an Iranian ground radar could theoretically detect an inbound contact, the weapons that would destroy that radar were already past the point of no return. But the mission wasn't primarily to shoot things down, it was to listen. Every active electronic emission below, every search radar that hadn't been destroyed yet, every mobile battery repositioning and broadcasting its location in the process, every command post pushing encrypted traffic through channels it thought were secure, all of it was being absorbed, cataloged, and forwarded in real time to the strike aircraft holding further back. A mobile air defense battery that had relocated during the chaos of the first wave, thinking the warhead's lethal radius at the chosen release point would have caught the launcher chassis, but almost certainly allowed the missile itself to topple away from the blast, damaged but possibly not destroyed. An intact or semi-intact ballistic missile lying in a valley is a problem that doesn't go away.
He needed the fuel lines connected. He needed the crew in position. He needed the moment when everything was gathered in one place. 10 seconds. The crew kept working. 15. The checklist continued. The ground crew stepped back from the umbilical connection. Release. The guided bomb extended its wings on the way down. Electro-optical and GPS guidance walking it through a trajectory calculated to maximize coverage across the launcher and the missile simultaneously. 12 seconds of guided flight. The detonation point was chosen for the junction where the launcher rail met the truck chassis, the structural center of the entire assembly. The fuel tank ruptured. The secondary explosion, liquid propellant igniting in an instant, overwhelmed the infrared camera's dynamic range. The image whited out completely. When it came back 2 seconds later, the valley floor was bare and scorched. Nothing remained that could be called a launcher. Nothing remained that could be called a threat. But that was one. The mountain ranges held many more, some in tunnels with reinforced approaches, some as deliberate decoys positioned to absorb attention and precision munitions while the real vehicles worked elsewhere, and some, the crews that moved fast enough, set up in positions not yet covered, hit their checklist before a targeting solution could be built. Some of those missiles launched. The drone stockpile problem was a separate race running in parallel. Iran had spent years building a capability that didn't require sophisticated aircraft or trained pilots. One-way attack drones, cheap enough to build in large numbers, simple enough to operate, pre-programmed with coordinates, launched in swarms designed to exhaust defensive interceptors through volume. The warehouses and hardened facilities holding those drones represented one of the highest priority target sets of the entire operation. The logic was simple and brutal. Every drone destroyed before launch was a drone that never tested the air defense systems protecting population centers. Every launcher rack destroyed in a depot was 100 fewer intercept solutions that would need to be computed later. The strikes against drone infrastructure went in as part of the second wave after the radar suppression and the initial missile hunting had already degraded Iran's ability to respond with coordinated fire. Precision weapons walked through depot after depot across multiple provinces. Post-strike assessment would later put the number of destroyed pre-positioned drones in the hundreds. Some estimates went significantly higher. At the same time, American strikes hit the communication architecture binding the entire Iranian command structure together. Underground relay nodes, fiber optic switching points, the redundant systems that had been built specifically to survive a degraded communications scenario. The targeting logic here wasn't about destroying weapons, it was about destroying the ability to coordinate their use. A commander with weapons but no communication network is not a commander. He's a person in a bunker waiting for a phone that won't ring. Iran's internet traffic dropped to a fraction of its normal capacity, not a side effect, a metric, an external verifiable confirmation that the communication suppression was working. Third-party monitoring systems outside the country confirmed the numbers within hours. What does it mean when a country's air defense network goes dark? In a technical sense, it means the aircraft above are no longer operating in defended airspace. It means the targeting pipeline can run at capacity without the friction of having to suppress active threats in real time. It means the second wave and the third can focus entirely on what they were sent to destroy, rather than on surviving the trip there and back. In a human sense, it means something different. It means thousands of people who built careers and lives around a defensive system they believed was credible are now sitting in facilities that have stopped responding to commands, watching indicators that were supposed to tell them what was happening fall silent one by one. The Iranian air defense crews weren't incompetent. The engineers who designed the system weren't naive. They had studied the wars everyone else had studied. They had built redundancy into the architecture specifically because they knew what a systematic suppression campaign looked like. They had hardened, distributed, buried, and dispersed. What they couldn't fully account for was the gap between the system they had and the system being brought against it. Not because the gap was hidden from them. The broad outlines were publicly known to anyone who followed defense procurement and capability development. but knowing a gap exists and building a system capable of compensating for it in the time available and with the resources available are two different problems. They built the best system they could. It wasn't enough. Some of the missiles launched from the Western Mountains did what they were designed to do. They flew the trajectory, the warheads armed. Some reached their targets or came close enough that the interceptor network was the only thing standing between the warhead and the ground. That interceptor network had been built for exactly this scenario and had been exercised and upgraded in the years leading up to the operation. Iron Dome handles short-range rockets and artillery. David Sling handles medium-range ballistic threats. Arrow handles the longer-range ballistic missiles, the ones coming in fast from distance, the ones that required the most computing power and the most precise intercept geometry to defeat. At a day when hundreds of threats were being tracked simultaneously, that layered system was doing exactly what layered systems are designed to do. Not every engagement is clean. Not every intercept is successful on the first attempt. The architecture accounts for that. Multiple layers exist because any single layer will sometimes miss. The honest accounting is this: some Iranian fire got through, not nothing. The suppression of the launch capability was extensive, but not total. The hardened tunnels, the fast-moving crews, the decoys that successfully diverted attention from active launchers, all of it meant that some percentage of Iran's missile inventory flew the full trajectory. That percentage and what it hit and what it didn't hit is a different story. But the scope of what was launched before the suppression took full effect versus what was ready to launch before the operation began, those numbers tell you something about whether the mission achieved what it was designed to achieve. By the time the sun had moved far enough across the sky that the early morning radio traffic seemed like something from a different day, the strategic picture had changed in ways that take analysts months to fully map. The air defense system that Iran had spent a decade building and further 2 years partially rebuilding after previous strikes had been functionally neutralized. Not every component, not every radar in the country, but the integrated network, the system of systems that made individual components more than the sum of their parts, had been severed at enough nodes that what remained was a collection of isolated units operating without coordination. The ballistic missile inventory had been reduced, not eliminated. Iran's missile program is extensive, dispersed, and specifically designed to absorb a suppression campaign and retain residual capability. But the warehouses were gone. The pre-positioned rounds that had been fueled and staged for the retaliatory wave planned for later that afternoon were destroyed before they could be launched. The drone swarms that were supposed to overwhelm defensive interceptors through sheer volume, hundreds of one-way attack drones, pre-programmed and ready in their launch racks, were no longer a factor. The racks were debris. The communication nodes that would have allowed centralized coordination of any remaining capability had been cut deeply enough that the internet traffic monitoring confirmed the disruption without anyone having to take a side's word for it. A senior American official, in a statement that was careful in its specificity, said that air defense suppression was effective. That's diplomatic language for a conclusion that the targeting packages and post-strike assessments were already confirming in much starker terms. The aircraft that had been holding in orbit for hours, waiting for exactly the moment when the air defense picture shifted far enough to push deep, finally got the call to proceed. The third wave went in against targets that the first 2 waves couldn't safely reach while the integrated defense network was still functioning. Ballistic missile storage, air defense production lines, infrastructure that if left intact would become the foundation for the next version of what was just destroyed. The logic of the campaign was not just to win the day, it was to extend the timeline before the next version of this problem could be assembled and fielded. There's a version of this story that ends here with a clean accounting of what was built and what was destroyed and what that means for the balance of capabilities in the region. That version is incomplete. The people who launched those missiles from the Western Mountains weren't acting on orders they disagreed with. The radar crews who stayed at their posts after the first wave hit, who tried to keep their equipment running and their sectors active while the suppression campaign worked around them, they were doing their jobs. The engineers who designed